The #1 Wayland hater has logged back on, and today I am bringing you another piece of X11 propaganda. So this is a blog post that was published by the KiCad developers team, and if you're not familiar with KiCad, well, it is an open source piece of software for computer-aided design. That's what CAD stands for. Looks like you can do some, like designing electronic circuits, PCB layouts, and so on. And they published a blog post about the support of Wayland within KiCad. This was published on June 10th of this year, which was about a week ago at the time of me recording this. So what do they say? Well, the KiCad development team frequently receives questions about our support for Wayland. Given that Fedora and Ubuntu are both planning to drop X11 support from their main desktop environments in the near future, we want to provide clear, transparent guidance to our users about the current state of Wayland support in KiCad. And for those of you not familiar, both Fedora and Ubuntu have decided to drop X11 support entirely in their upcoming releases. So here is the issue on Fedora, where it was opened a month ago and accepted a month ago. Wayland only GNOME, and they are completely removing the GNOME X11 packages from the Fedora repositories. And similarly, on Ubuntu, with the 25.10 release, they are dropping the GNOME Xorg packages as well. So they're moving exclusively to the Wayland versions. And both of these changes seem to be, well, a bit controversial, I think. I mean, if we look here, +1, +1, -1, it's at least not unanimous. The one person that objected to this said, as I previously wrote on the mailing list, I don't think this provides any actual benefit to our users, because only people who want to use our X11 session code use it. So the argument that it doesn't work since it clearly works for those people, or at least works better than the alternatives. I don't see any reason to disable this code before upstream. And what that means is, well, on Fedora, the default session is Wayland, and you have the option to install the X11 support, but as far as I understand, it's not installed by default. So this change will remove it from the repository entirely, which basically means you no longer have the option to install it, and it is completely unsupported. Like I said, I'm kind of a bit of a Wayland hater at this point in time. I do think that keeping X11 around makes sense for the people that do need it for whatever their specific use cases are. So to be honest, I agree with this person. It seems like 2 other people agreed as well with a thumbs up. I can't give it a thumbs up. I don't know how to do that. This is literally 1984. But yeah, it looks like the consensus is that it was accepted on Fedora and as well on Ubuntu. There are some people kind of complaining about certain things. Accessibility on Wayland is one thing that is definitely lacking compared to X11. And then a few people talking about like screen sharing and that kind of thing, certain applications not working. The reality is that at this point, those decisions have already been made. So Fedora and Ubuntu will both be dropping X11. So what do the KiCad devs say about this? Well, they say that the current status of Wayland is functional but degraded, or at least the status of their application under Wayland. KiCad does run on Wayland systems, but with significant limitations and known issues that substantially degrade the user experience. While you can design PCBs using KiCad on Wayland, you'll encounter numerous problems that we cannot fix at the application level. The following problems are known issues in Wayland protocols or their implementation in desktop compositors, window managers, or other layers in the display stack that are beyond our ability to resolve. Window management issues. First one being window placement and restoration. Wayland does not currently allow controlling window position. That means when you open KiCad, it cannot remember where you last placed your windows. Docked panel positioning. Docked panels and toolbars cannot be properly managed or restored. Multi-window coordination. Problems with managing multiple KiCad windows simultaneously. And window dragging limitations. Dragging tabs and panels between areas is broken or unreliable. Next category is input and interaction problems. We have cursor/pointer warping. Essential for many CAD operations, it is conditionally available in some Wayland implementations, depending on support for optional protocol extensions. And this is kind of one of the issues with Wayland, is because there's no central implementation, and this thing isn't standardized yet. Well, some environments have support for these extensions that aren't really official yet, and they're not really standards. So you can't really rely on them, unfortunately. Focus management. Unpredictable window focus behavior that can interrupt workflows, and input device handling. Various issues with specialized input devices and hotkeys. But that's not all. There are performance and stability issues. High CPU and GPU usage. resource consumption spikes that don't occur under X11. Perhaps this is just a KiCad issue, but again, if you have to change your entire application to work under this new system, well, the reality is that that's a lot of work, which, maybe it does need to get done, but, well, the reality is that it needs to get done, right? It's not for free. Graphical glitches, rendering artifacts and display corruption. I've personally seen this, not with this application, but running KDE on my machine under Wayland. There's something going on with, like, restoring from sleep where it just doesn't work correctly, and the display just corrupts sometimes, and Windows completely glitch out, and yeah, it's kind of a mess. So this isn't an issue that is unique to KiCad. I've personally experienced this myself. Application freezes and crashes, instability issues specific to the Wayland environment. Clipboard functionality, unreliable copy-paste operations between applications. And finally, dialogue and UI limitations. With modal dialogue behavior, issues with dialogue positioning, focus, and interaction. And finally, external tool integration, problems launching and managing external applications. So the question is, why do these issues persist? Is this inherently a Wayland problem? Is it fixing bugs in X11 that are now coming to the surface? Like, what's going on here? Well, according to the KiCad devs, these problems exist because Wayland's design omits basic functionality that desktop applications for X11, Windows, and macOS have relied on for decades. Things like being able to position windows or warp the mouse cursor. This functionality was omitted by design, not oversight. The fragmentation doesn't help either. GNOME interprets protocols one way, KDE another way, and smaller compositors yet another way. As application developers, we can't depend on a consistent implementation of various Wayland protocols and experimental extensions. Linux is already a small section of the KiCad user base. Further fragmentation by window managers creates an unsustainable support burden. Most frustrating is that we can't fix these problems ourselves. The issues live in Wayland protocols, window managers, and compositors. These are not things that we, as application developers, can code around or patch. We are not the only application facing these challenges, and we hope that the Wayland ecosystem will mature and develop a more balanced, consistent approach that allows applications to function effectively, but we are not there yet. And really, I think that's the key here. We are not there yet. So for now, what the KiCad team has done is they've decided to avoid window manager-specific workarounds that would require maintaining separate code paths for different desktop environments. Right, Linux is already fragmented enough as is. If you have to rewrite parts of your application for every single compositor or window manager desktop environment, no one's going to do that, right? That's just way too much of a burden on application developers. Continue building and testing Wayland compatibility where possible, but without dedicating primary development resources to it. Unfortunately, as various distributions begin dropping X11 support, this might not be feasible to maintain in the long term, which I think is part of the problem with dropping X11 this early. Focus our limited development time on features and improvements that benefit all users, makes sense to me, and maintain clear documentation about Wayland limitations and set appropriate user expectations. And one of these user expectations is their bug report policy for Wayland users. They will not investigate or support bug reports related to Wayland-specific issues. This includes problems with all of these issues that we talked about above, and in particular, any other issues that cannot be reproduced on X11 systems. Again, the reality is that open source applications, they only have so many developers, right? I mean, even proprietary ones, people only have so much time to make improvements, to make changes. The unfortunate reality is that if the Linux desktop is going to move to Wayland, it's going to require a lot of time from people just to make things compatible again. And so these are their recommendations for users. For professional use, if you use KiCad professionally or require a reliable, full-featured experience, we strongly recommend 1. Use X11-based desktop environments such as XFCE with X11, let's go, KDE Plasma with X11, Mate, or other traditional desktop environments that maintain X11 support. Kind of based, honestly. Just telling people, yeah, don't use Wayland, use X11. I'm shilling X11 here, but anyway. Install an X11 compatible display manager like LightDM or KDM instead of GDM if your distribution defaults to Wayland only, and choose distributions that maintain X11 support. Some distributions are moving to Wayland only configs that may not suit your needs. And for casual use, just get used to the application being worse, honestly, compared to what you get on X11. On Wayland, some things just won't work. It'll be buggy. Unfortunately, that's just what you'll have to do. Looking forward, we do recognize that the Linux desktop ecosystem is evolving, and we're not trying to stop that evolution. However, we believe that user productivity comes first. Our users need to design circuit boards, not wrestle with experimental desktop technologies. Stability and reliability are paramount for professional work, and our limited development resources should focus on core functionality rather than working around protocol limitations. To me, that really makes sense, right? In the FOSS world, it seems like a lot of people don't really pay attention to the users that much and the user needs, right? Like, I mean, we all have seen applications that are FOSS that just have very poor UI or UX with, there are plenty of people willing to write code, but not many people willing to actually look at an application from the user's perspective and see what needs to get done to make it better for the users, right? So it's nice to see that they're adopting this kind of pragmatic stance of saying, well, we wanted to deliver value to our users, right? We want to give our users the best application that we can so that they can do the work that they need to do. To me, that makes sense. Back to the blog post. We continue to monitor Wayland development and welcome fixes from upstream projects. We've engaged with desktop environment developers at conferences like FOSDEM and provide detailed feedback about our requirements. Some progress has been made. Pointer warping protocols are finally being developed, but many fundamental issues remain unresolved. And finally, the bottom line. We try to be pragmatic. We support what works, we document what doesn't, and we focus our development efforts where they'll have the most benefit for our users. We'll adjust our position as Wayland improves, but we won't compromise the reliability and functionality of KiCad. For now, if you need to use KiCad on Linux, use X11. A round of applause to the developers for sticking to their guns on this one. If the best user experience is on X11, then users should stay on X11 and should not be forced to move to Wayland. I mean, okay, I say forced, right? Linux is an open system, right? You can always just reinstall another distro. But I personally find it very unfortunate that distros like Fedora, I mean, Fedora is kind of, somewhat bleeding edge, so perhaps that's fine. But Ubuntu in particular, I think it's a bad move for them to move to Wayland only with 25.10, especially if it means that that's going to be the only option for the 26.04 LTS. Because realistically, I think a lot of people do just use the LTS versions, right? Particularly new users, they're told that's the stable version, that's what works, right? Any issues with the LTS have long since been ironed out with all the intermediate releases, so a lot of new users are going to be on the LTS version. And so at this point, I'm not sure if it's confirmed that 26.04 will also be Wayland only, but I guess we'll see. And this is not the only application where Wayland is an issue. So there's this password manager called KeePass XC. It's pretty popular, cross-platform community-driven port of the Windows application, KeePass Password Safe, right? 24,000 almost stars on GitHub. Not that that really matters, but it is an application that people use, right? It's not just one person's random project that nobody cares about. And unfortunately, support for autotyping on Wayland is still not there, right? Here's this comment by DroidMonkey, who is I think the main person in charge of this repository, right? I don't know if they're like the only maintainer, but as far as I know, they're basically the number one person in charge. And this is an issue about autotyping, which is when your password manager will type in your password into other windows, so you don't need to manually copy-paste it. He wrote, "Thank you for all the input, but we don't need any further discussion on this. What you are seeing is autotype happening between applications running on the X-Wayland backend. You are still communicating through an X11 server between KeePass XC and the other application. Wayland is just receiving the output and passing it to the compositor. There is no support currently for autotype in a purely Wayland mode of operation. Because, well, there's just no protocol for this yet. Now, there is a merge request here, a pull request, if you will, to actually implement this, but as of current year, 2025, it's still in draft mode. It's still not merged, right? There's still a lot of comments here, and it's still not in the application. So if you want to use autotype with KeePass XC on Wayland, sorry, you're out of luck. The protocol just doesn't exist yet. And in fact, they have this entire post here about the status of autotype on Wayland. On Wayland, this relies on a special plugin called KPU input, which allows KeePass to use the /dev/uinput device for sending key presses to other windows. And the reason that they need this is because Wayland just doesn't support a lot of things. Advanced autotype features that need the title of the target window, like window sequence associations and a system-wide hotkey, are not supported, because Wayland does not seem to provide any way to get the title of the currently active window, in contrast to X11 and Microsoft Windows. Even Microsoft Windows has this functionality. You are missing features that are present on Microsoft Windows. If an API is added to Wayland for getting the title of the currently active window, or if a layer or library between Wayland and desktop environments is developed, we'll consider using this, blah blah blah. But at this point, one common API, like the ones provided by X11 and Windows, is much more reasonable, but it just doesn't exist yet, right? There are a large number of desktop environments, more than 30, and each of them have their own way of doing this because there's no standard Wayland protocol for this. However, even with this plugin, due to the complicated setup of the KPU input plugin, the potential security issues and the limitations, we recommend to use X11 instead of Wayland if possible. Because X11 has features that just aren't present on Wayland yet, so if you need to use those features, if those features are part of your workflow, well, sorry, you're shit out of luck. There's no way to do it on Wayland, which is again why I think that distros dropping X11 support is a mistake, because those distros are saying, look, those use cases, your workflow, all these things that work right now on X11, yeah, it might get added to Wayland someday, but you know what? It's fine. We can just pretend that it's already there. And, yeah, let's just, your current workflow that doesn't work anymore, yeah, no, that's not important. You can use another distro if you want to do that. Anyway, let's go to the security section. One of the big advantages, by the way, of Wayland, at least that, the very, I'll call them Wayland shills. I'm kind of being mean here, but Wayland supporters, let's put them that way. They really harp on security as one of the big reasons for why Wayland is better. And yes, security is better on Wayland. However, security is only good if users aren't forced to implement workarounds, right? We all know those like crappy password policies where you have to reset your password every 90 days, right? Like, I don't know how many of you have actually seen them, but, they existed in the corporate world because those were kind of the recommendations however many years ago. The problem is, it's in theory more secure to have to change your password every 90 days, but the problem with doing that is, well, users are going to get fed up with that. They're not going to be able to remember what the current password is, and then they'll just do stupid things like writing the password on a sticky note and then sticking it onto their monitor, or just adding a number to the end of the password and just adding 1 every time they need to change the password. And so that's kind of one of the issues with security. As soon as users start implementing workarounds for your inability to provide a good user experience, all of the benefits of that security go away, and you're in fact in a worse place than where you started. Case in point here, the autotype on Wayland. Wayland does not seem to provide any API for sending key presses to other windows. Therefore, the KPU input plugin uses an API from a lower level, namely the /dev/uinput device, which is at the Linux kernel level. For security reasons, this device by default is not accessible by regular users. The setup steps make the device usable by regular users, which is every user in the uinput group. On a system that is used by one user only, this typically is not a problem. However, on a system with multiple users, it may be a security issue, and we advise against the solution in this case. On X11 and Windows, there is no such problem, because X11 and Windows provide APIs for sending key presses to other windows that are limited to the current user. In other words, no access to devices on a lower level is required. So how does this work? What does this device do? Well, let's take a look at the installation steps. First of all, you need to make sure that you have all these things installed. You need to have a C++ compiler, the C++ standard library, the header files for whatever Linux version you're using, the systemd utility library, development files, because you're going to be linking to that, the XKB compiler, I don't even know what that is, and mono development tools and libraries as well. Because guess what? If you want to use autotype on Wayland, you're going to have to compile this stuff yourself. Okay, so what do you do next? Well, first of all, you create a new group called uinput. Okay, makes sense. You add your current user to it, and then you echo some cryptic configurations that, I'm sure they work, but most users probably aren't going to understand a lot of what this means, and just echo it into a udev rule effectively creating a new udev rule that the kernel will understand. Okay. Next, you'll have to reboot your machine. Everyone loves doing that. Then you'll have to download the plugin package. Of course, the source code is available, right? This is available under GPL v2, so that's nice. But, you'll have to compile, you'll have to download the input package, make the shell script inside executable, and then run it. Okay. And then if successful, it creates a shared library. What you do next is you move all of those plugin files into the KeePass application directory. And if you're not using the portable version, which I assume most users on Linux are not, right? We just install things from the package manager typically. Navigate to the KeePass application directory, which contains the .so file, and then copy it to /user/lib. And now that all of those changes are made, what does that do? Well, that means you have basically just created a security vulnerability in your system in order to use this normal password manager functionality, where now any user can pretty much read and write to the inputs of any other user, which, as you can imagine, is extremely dangerous, right? If you're running on a user with multiple systems, you can just type into other people's, terminals. At least I assume that's how it works, but I'm pretty sure it is. You can get info, you can get what another user is typing in, you can type stuff in for them. Obviously, that's a massive security vulnerability. However, on Wayland, because there is no protocol to do this safely, even though Wayland is supposed to be the safer approach, the only way to get it working on Wayland is to open an even bigger security hole than existed in X11 in the first place. With X11, it's contained to the user, right? Like, sure, there's some issue with applications being able to read and write from, each other's windows, and okay, I understand that is, in 2025, less than ideal, where, applications come from perhaps untrusted sources and so on. I understand that that's a security benefit. However, because it lacks the ability to do this safely at all, users are forced to resort to this method, which is a huge security vulnerability, much more than existed with X11. And that's what I mean by, if your security model doesn't allow users to use a workflow that is simple, straightforward, and that works for them, they will implement workarounds that completely undermine the entire security model and make it worse than what existed in the first place, right? If you use this, your system is less secure than it would have been on X11. And I think that's unfortunate, right? Because a lot of these distros, like I said, really my frustration with Wayland is not with the protocol itself. And, sure, there's some things have been in the works for years and there's little progress, and with protocols and so on, there's bureaucracy, whatever, right? That's fine. That's just the nature of things, whatever. What I'm concerned about is that distros are making the switch to Wayland only before it's ready. And really, I think that's the fundamental problem here, is that if users are going to be using workarounds like this, they're going to open security vulnerabilities on their systems. And if X11 isn't an option, and this is the only way to use autotype, users are going to do this. There is going to be at least one person that reads this guide, follows it, performs these steps, and then gets themselves in trouble because, well, they open a huge security vulnerability in their system, and then now, some other malicious user is going to steal their passwords. And this could have been prevented if they were just given the option to use X11 on their distro of choice, or if Wayland was actually ready for use. And that, I think, sums up why I'm kind of a Wayland hater at this point. I don't hate Wayland itself. What I really dislike is, and to be clear, the whole Wayland hater thing, it's tongue-in-cheek. I don't actually hate it. But I do seriously dislike the fact that distros are pretending that Wayland is ready for the average user. They say things like, oh, okay, what if you want variable refresh rate on different screens? What if you have a screen that's 60 hertz and another one that's, 144? Wow, that works on Wayland where it didn't work on X11. And sure, that's a nice feature to have, but until this basic functionality works, the basics are more important than the advanced fancy features. Until this basic functionality works, Wayland is just not ready, and users will have a worse experience than they would have had on X11, which I think is going to hurt the Linux desktop overall. And like, that's where I'm coming from, right? That's my angle. If a new user goes to Linux, right? Let's say they install Ubuntu 26.04, right? People recommend Ubuntu. It's the popular distro. It's the beginner distro. Fine. If it's Wayland only, do you think a new user is going to understand the security implications of this? No, I don't think they will. And they will have a worse experience than they would have had on Wayland. They'll potentially open their system to security vulnerabilities, and they'll leave with a poor impression of what the Linux desktop is. And that's why I dislike distros switching to Wayland only right now. Because I think when that happens, when they switch from supporting both X11 and Wayland to only supporting Wayland, there will be a measurable drop in the quality of the Linux desktop for the average user, which I think is bad. I don't like it. I wish the Linux desktop would get better, and Wayland will get better. I have no doubt of that. Eventually, once all these issues are sorted out, I'm happy to use Wayland. I'd be glad to use it. But until that happens, until this basic functionality is not available, I think dropping Wayland support is a mistake. But what do you think? Perhaps you have a different opinion. Let me know in the comments. All you Wayland shills. Again, I'm joking when I say that. I don't actually hate Wayland or, people who support Wayland. But if any of you Wayland shills have something to say in the comments, please do. Let me know. And perhaps some of these distros will change their minds if enough people complain. Really, that's my goal with making this. Thanks for watching. X11 shill, out.